Hey y'all, welcome to Night Shift Delirium, a podcast about junior doctors and the world that surrounds them. Trigger warning. On this week's episode, we're talking about grief and loss, something that many of us have experienced and or are experiencing, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sometimes when we're in the throes of grief, it's hard for us to even discuss it, and we understand and appreciate that here at Delirium. So feel free to skip this episode if that's you. If you don't feel it would be too triggering, I think there might be something in here for you. I'm joined in conversation by Delirium favorite, Dorothy, a senior house officer based in England. Welcome to our shift, y'all. Okay, welcome to Night Shift Delirium. Today we are talking with Dot, a friend of the podcast. Everyone knows her. She's very popular. And we're going to talk about something a little bit more serious because the last couple of years have been heavy for the entire world with the COVID-19 pandemic and all of its consequences. We've lost people from the pandemic. We've lost people from delay in care, delay in treatment, isolation. We've lost dreams, many, many different things. And we as medical providers have dealt with a lot of that as well. So I wanted to talk with you about grief in all of its glory and its pain. We've had personal experiences with grief, and I think our perspective might be interesting and helpful to someone else. So before we start, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Night Shift Delirium again. I'm Dot. I work with Victoria. I'm still a locum SHO. Like Vic has mentioned, worked through the pandemic, still working through the pandemic. So that's who I am.
Okay, good. If anyone hasn't listened to your story before, obviously they should. She's in season 1, The Journey, Dorothy, and in spirituality and medicine, with Mahnor. So, and I think you've made a few cameos throughout, really. But this is your first debut on season 2.
Oh yes.
So that's exciting. So anyone who hasn't heard her story, if you're interested, go back and listen to the episode. Lots of tidbits there. So let's just get into it. Today we're going to be having a conversation between the two of us. We're essentially going to be interviewing one another. So when did you first encounter personal grief in your career in medicine?
When you say in my career, so
as being a doctor or being a trainee, being
so in
med
a workplace.
student. Yeah.
That's a really interesting question. That's a really interesting question. Grief over a patient or
anything that sort of stood out to you.
I think there was a patient that we lost, a young guy, in 2019. He was 28, if I can remember, and when he came onto the ward, he was unwell. He was acutely unwell, but I didn't know that he was that unwell that he would pass away within the next 2 weeks. I think for us, most of the junior doctors, we were around 30 or 30 and under, and it was so close to home to see somebody so young, so unwell. And I think with the young people, they have so much, they have such a large physiological reserve, so they hold on to life. So we just literally watched him die over the week. And I think I don't think it was the fact that he was dying. I just thought the fact that he was so young and just seeing how much of an impact his life had on so many people, like his family, his friends. It was just moving. It was incredibly moving. Our job always reminds me of the brevity of life. And obviously with my own experiences that with personal loss, I have such a true understanding of the brevity of life now. So yeah, I think that was one experience at work that will always stick in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it was the start of F1, and there was another lady who had passed, a couple of people had passed away. One lady really stuck with me. She had heart failure. So common, so many people have it, family members that I'm close to have it, and I had never seen the end stage results of it. But more importantly, she didn't know that she had heart failure. And obviously for it to get to where it was, no one had really explained it to her. So I sat down with her one day in the afternoon and went through what heart failure is, what does it mean, and where she was. And like, she just hadn't had that conversation before. I don't think she had a lot of education in things, but it was very clear from her response to me that it was new information. And I just found that to be really devastating in a way. I think it's a failure of primary care, and primary care looks a lot different here than what I understand primary care to be. But I think from that moment on, I realized, you know what, we can't rush through these things. We have to explain to people what it is that they have. We can't just throw a diagnosis and expect someone else to do that work, because someone else might assume someone else has told her, you know, she's had all these changes in her medications and all of these things. And it just was so sad to see someone who, in a way, and we'll sort of get into this a little bit later on, she had the privilege of knowing that she was unwell. And ultimately is going to die from that, which I think is, in my opinion, a little bit of a privilege, because people die all the time without any understanding or any warning. And if you understand that things are getting worse, then eventually you will die. You might move a little bit differently. Of course, tomorrow's not promised, but, you know, there's something really special about having that knowledge and empowering your patients. And I just decided from that point on, I'm just going to take the time. I don't care if someone gets annoyed at me, but because it matters, you know? And so that definitely, for me, was my first experience. That when she died, it was just sad, you know? She was a lovely lady. I'm sure many people in her life, you know, miss her and knew her in a personal way. But in a work setting, she's a lady that I think impacts how I interact with my patients.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. No, I think it's really important what you said about being able to empower our patients with that information, because life is so futile, and if people do not even have an idea of what's going on with them, it's almost an injustice, because from the medical perspective, you know that, and I think sometimes that's the issue sometimes in medicine, is that because we see something so frequently, we become so matter of fact about it that we don't even think this is going to change someone's life, the people around them, it's going to change their life, and we just carry it with such, you know, we sometimes just carry like, oh, you know, we see people die all the time, but with every one person that dies, there's a whole family that deals with it. And so therefore it's really important to understand and to still be human. It doesn't matter how many times we have to do things, but to still be human in the things that we do. And to remind trainees coming up, to remind even those above us that death is real. And I think when doctors become patients, or when doctors experience loss, it brings them right back down to earth. And I said to somebody the other day, I said, if you practice medicine realizing that you also are a patient, every doctor is a patient. We are all potential patients. Being a human makes you a potential patient. Then the way you will see things will be different.
Absolutely.
All of us, if you want children, will potentially be in the hospital to have a child one day. we'll take our kids for their immunizations, or you might need a particular, you might break your ankle, or you might do anything. I'm just saying quite simple things, but you will possibly potentially be a patient. So once you think like that, I think that human factor will remind you, and when you're treating people, particularly around those times, you can make such a huge difference. And I always say that. I say that a lot of the time, it sounds quite morbid, but people a lot of the time do come to hospital to die, because it means we're at the point where their condition has gotten to. It's at a point that needs quite serious intervention that could have possibly a bad outcome or hopefully a good outcome. So if in that hospital setting you already know that there's that potential, I think there should be a internal reckoning with yourself that I must make sure that this experience for this person is as dignified as possible. Absolutely. And I truly believe in dignity in practice, and I think that for me is something that I'm quite passionate about, particularly when I deal with my patients. It's not about how many receptors do I know. It's like, did I make this patient at this point in time that they met me feel better about their situation, even if the situation is not good?
Yeah, I totally agree. And you kind of mentioned personal loss, so I think we might as well go ahead and move on to our own experiences with personal loss. Would you like to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Yep, I don't mind.
Go for it.
I guess, okay, so where do we start? So in 2019, I lost my dad. He was a GP, and he had quite a short battle with cancer. It's really unexpected, fit and well man, probably the fittest in the house, and it was the middle of my foundation year 2 training, so it was just a really big shock. We'd gone to a party the day before, him, my mum, myself and my sister. He was fine, and then the next day, because my dad was also a minister, he wasn't feeling too well at church. He didn't tell us that he wasn't feeling well, but he just went out to get some fresh air, and then he couldn't really stand up. So I think somebody walked past, and I think he leaned on someone and just said, "Can you get my wife?" And then, cut long story short, he collapsed, and then went into hospital, and we found out that he had cancer the next day. And I think that was in October 2018, and then he died February 2019, about 2 weeks after my birthday. So that was, does anybody ever expect that? I mean, in our culture, you always pray for your parents to, die before you, but I guess my dad was 58, that was really early, really unexpected. So that was something that is, I won't say was, is and remains something that I live with. I've been learning to live with, which is still a journey and a process over the last 2.5 years. So that's my story.
And foundation year 2 is very early in your life as a doctor. I think you have an understanding of life and death. You have the book knowledge, you're qualified, you've had a little bit of experience seeing it in the hospital. But like you said, it's different when you're the patient or you're the loved one of a patient. Do you think your year and a half or so of experience changed your journey of sort of his illness and also after he passed away? Do you think that sort of changed your opinion? Or do you think if it had happened, years prior, before you had the qualifications of being a doctor, do you think it would have made a difference?
That's an interesting question, actually. I just finished F1. I think I did AMU psych and then trauma and orthopedics. Then I started the pathology rotation. So I hadn't really, I locumed a lot, I hadn't done a lot of medicine. But, you know, I was just fresh out of medical school and a degree. I was finally kind of enjoying my life, I guess, with my pittance that I was earning. And you just, and I guess it goes back to what I said at the beginning. The way I will say things now will be because of what I've experienced. You know, everyone thinks or hopes and wishes to be empathic or wishes to understand what the patient is going through or thinks they have an idea because they're exposed to it, what the patient is going through. Even I would go as far as to say, you know, my cousin, she lost her dad quite young, and not that I understood what I thought I understood what she was going through, but you think you can imagine it. Until you're there, you can't imagine it. You can't even comprehend it. You just don't think it's going to happen to you, even though you're seeing it all the time. It's just the way the human mind works. You just don't think it will happen to you. Why would it happen to my dad? He's so healthy. You know, you just didn't. It doesn't even cross your mind. You know, so I just feel in that moment. Obviously, there were things when we're going through, you know, his treatment and stuff like that. And, you know, my dad is a doctor as well. So he was now being a patient. I mean, at this point, my dad didn't even know where he was registered. Because he didn't register where the family was registered. So he was just like, we had to register him. You know, he doesn't even know how to take paracetamol. Like, he literally doesn't know how to take it. It's like, it's actually embarrassing watching him taking it. So he just didn't even think about it. The only thing being a doctor did help was just kind of understanding the system. And that was it. And sometimes I think it was difficult because you became you were a relative, you were also a clinician, and then you're just in between. You're in between your clinician mind and your relative mind as well. And then I guess the hardest part again is that I'm talking to an experienced doctor, and then I think on top of it, my dad was a cancer lead, so he was a cancer lead for his clinical commissioning group in Newham. So he was a cancer lead, so he knew it, but he also was so shocked. And there's so many things that these things bring up, you know. You have, you know, like you said about kind of knowing is a privilege. You have to start sorting things out. I have 3 younger siblings, 2 were in university, 1 was in university abroad. So it was just really different things. My mum's not a medic, so sometimes the things that we would talk about she wouldn't really understand, and it was frustrating for her. I had to change location of my F2 so I could help at home, and also kind of be a carer for my dad because he deteriorated quite quickly. So you just kind of go into autopilot mode. You just go into a different mode. You just go into this relative mode. You know, the empathy I have for relatives now, because, you know, sometimes as doctors we talk in such a detached way. And, you know, when we're talking about why won't the family just accept, I was just like, would you accept? Yeah. You know, and, you know, why won't the family or the family are in denial? And of course they're in denial. Mm-hmm. Like, who wants to accept that their 58-year-old dad, who was once fit and well, possibly is going to die? Like, who wants to accept that? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I went into relative mode. I was really, you know, defensive. I was really like, oh, why? So what can we do? So are you sure this works? And this kind of, like, you know, really kind of, you know, and they would know I was a doctor. They would know my dad was a doctor. My dad, you know, so it was like I was trying to talk on behalf of my family, and, you know, you just kind of go into a mode of just, I can't imagine this person dying because you know that death is so real because you've seen it. So did that 1.5 years help? I guess the only thing that helped was that I was respected a bit more by the people treating him because I was a doctor and they thought I could have an idea of what I was talking about. Even when he did collapse, they wanted to discharge him. I said, absolutely no way. I said, my dad never complains about anything, and that's when they investigated further and found out that he had cancer. So you just go into relative mode, and I guess how it helps me today is definitely I have a deep level of empathy for patients. I understand, they sometimes, because grief is not just in losing someone, grief also is a reaction. So grief, you can have a grief reaction to a diagnosis, you can have a grief reaction to that. So part of the grief reaction sometimes is, in the cycle of grief, I think there's denial, there's, anger. So sometimes patients will talk to us out of anger, they'll talk to us out of that denial. They'll talk to us out of that sadness. And I get it. I understand it because I've done it, because I've been there. I've been that person who's been completely irrational, because I just can't grasp the idea of my dad, number one, being this unwell, and then the idea that he possibly might die. So yeah, I think it was like a shift. Even the way I reacted when I found out was just, so it's just a shift. I don't see myself as a doctor. I couldn't care less about being a doctor. I just couldn't care less. I even said to my mum the other day, I was just like, I would give up my degree for my dad to come back and stuff like that. So it's a shift when it becomes your relative.
Yeah, I think there's so much actually that you said in there that I can't even, there's so many things to sort of get into. And I think the most important thing I would probably say is the humanity of it all. Like you said it, we are degular people who happen to read books sometimes and happen to take a few exams. And sometimes when you are working on the other side, it's easy to get frustrated with patients or upset sometimes if patients put all of their frustrations on you, because we are still humans. There's the humanity of the doctor as well. But when you take just a minute to recognize where they're coming from, I'm not saying they're always rational, even when you give them that minute. Even after giving you that minute, and some people are absolutely, they often have other things going on, but we do as well. And so I'm not excusing sort of everything, but in general, people are just frustrated, Hospitals are extremely frustrating places. They're not, warm, cozy places that you go to for fun.
And I think we sometimes I walk around work and I just do you are in a hospital every day? It sounds such a weird thing to say, even though I'm a doctor, but in a sense that some people do not even know what hospital looks like.
Yeah.
Yet this is where I am every day. So I don't see it as this place of doom. But then sometimes I walk around the atrium and I'm just somebody here has just received really bad news that's changed their whole life. Mm-hmm. Not somebody, a majority.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll go to the coffee shop and I'll see people sitting down there. And I remember when my mum and I would be at the Royal Free and would go to the coffee shop, or would be at Queen's Hospital and would go to the coffee shop. And people are thinking we're just having coffee, but inside our hearts are pounding. Yeah. We're running back to the ward just to make sure nothing has changed. And I look around and I think people are coming here afraid. There are so many emotions that are in this building right now. But to me, I'm just going to meet my friends, for lunch.
Yeah.
Because it's my place of work. So I understand why we can get that way, and even still be that way.
Yeah.
Because it is our place of work.
It is. And things do become normalized and we do become clinical. How many times do we walk through anywhere in the hospital, especially when patients, family members and things were allowed to come to wards more frequently, and someone is in a corner crying or being consoled? It is such a common and routine experience. And it doesn't mean that, for us on the other side, that we don't see it and that we don't feel it. But sometimes it means we have to have a healthy distance emotionally, because I remember when I first started working and it's just gosh, everyone is sick. And it's something that when you think about or when I was younger and I thought about being a doctor, I didn't think about people being seriously ill that they're going to die. I thought of more primary care situations. Someone has a cold, you give them some, like, azithromycin or whatever, and they feel better a few days later. That's what I thought of. I thought of wellness, not necessarily of illness. And when you're in hospital, it's 9 times out of 10 illness. And
exactly. That's the thing about hospital.
It was just really shocking for me when I first started working, even though obviously I'd been rotating and, like, you know, it's not that I wasn't exposed at all, but now I was a lot more responsible I wasn't the sole person responsible for these patients, but I was responsible in many ways.
It is actually, I want to go back to your question. Did that year and a half change you? I guess it made me think that death was real. Because just like yourself, all the work experience I had done prior to that had been in the GP practice, had been in my dad's practice, and it is about wellness, it is about health education, it's about preventative care, it's all about those different things. Your patients are well, they're laughing, they're bringing you sweets, you know, they're just here. You're walking to lunch and the porters are pushing a dead body past you, and it's just normal. It's just normal. Or you'll come in the next day and they're like, oh no, she died last night, do you want to go and do a death certificate?
Yes.
You know, it's normal. You know, we used to laugh, but prior to the pandemic, and say, oh, going to get my ash cash today.
Yeah.
You know, ash cash, for those that don't understand, is that junior doctors used to get remitted for anytime they filled out cremation forms. So we used to get about £82. So, you know, death, I was like, oh gosh, people die. People are dying. You know, people die. And you're just like, wow, okay.
Yeah, like this is, okay,
there's a mortuary, like you're literally going to lunch and walking past a mortuary.
Yeah, and if you're doing this, you know, death certificate or cremation form, part of that is to go and look at the body and identify it, you know, and this is something that people do in a lunch break, looking at a dead body. And that, when I first started, was like, it was very hard for me to come home because I was like, and I'm a first year. They're not asking me to do very much, but still, I'm like, did I make the right call? Did I, you know, and I just felt such great responsibility because the patients are so unwell, you know.
Do you remember the first death you had to verify? I definitely remember the first death I had to verify. I didn't verify it for hours because I was petrified.
Listen, I'm not going to lie. To this day, I'm not
August
rushing.
2017, Ipswich Hospital, doctor, come and verify this death. I said, sorry. I said, pardon. I waited for a couple of hours. I just remember my consultant at med school saying, just make sure they're actually dead. And again, it just, I guess the way I talk as well is very much driven by my faith as well. And you know, I always mention that. And because the Bible always tells us, God help us not forget the brevity of life. And there has been, I've seen 3 times, and one of them does include my dad, see people take their last breath, and it just reminds you how delicate life is, you know.
Absolutely.
How delicate life is. And I think even in not just when people are dying, and I think understanding how delicate life is also dictates my practice as well. That one paracetamol, if it's wrong and they are paracetamol's a really poor
still, if they've got
they've got a reaction to it that could affect them, that could make everything else become more deranged, you know, your one mistake can change a whole generation, or your one mistake can change your whole family. And I think this is what I've really learned from my own experience, is that there are people after the death.
Yes.
And there are people after the death. There are people that are really affected after the death. Yes, you know, that's one bed for us, one person in the mortuary, but that's like a family. And oh gosh, absolutely, there's another case that really, really moved me. And you know, I'm quite a resilient person. Most people will probably find out about this on the podcast about my dad's passing, but the one time I was moved to tears at work was when I'd come back from my bereavement leave. I was on general surgery, and there was a young lady who had metastatic ovarian cancer. So it spread to her omentum, to her bowel, to everything. So she had lots of bowel adhesions, and that's why she was under general surgery. So I'd seen her, and she was unwell, but she was stable. She was okay. She was talking and everything like that. I think she had a blockage. She came onto SCW. They saw her. It was fine. She was discharged home. Then she came in about 4 weeks later. Oh my goodness. Oh, she just looked so unwell. Like, I just knew, you know. And the first time I saw it, so I feel that since my dad passed away, that I do try and like spend a bit more time talking to my patients and just like kind of like seeing where their mind is, because I know hospital can be so fast. And actually, one thing I want to say is that hospital can be really fast, and we expect everybody to do it, but sometimes God, maybe you be the person that God wants to do it. Not everybody has the same gifts. So I just spoke to her, and I was like, oh, how are your family? And everything's like, yeah, they're fine. And, you know, and then I'm like, how are they coping and stuff like that? She just said, yeah, no, they're fine. And she didn't really talk much. Then the second time when she came in, I was like, oh, hey, and I saw it go again, and it was just her and I. And, you know, she kind of like grabbed my hand and I grabbed hers, and then we just kind of spoke. And she just said, you know what, I don't think my husband knows how bad this is. I don't think he gets it. And I just don't know how my children are going to cope. She was in her 40s. Oh my goodness. And I remember, so we spoke about 10 minutes, and she was like, I just don't know how they're going to cope. And then her husband came in, and she changed and tried to be a bit more, she tried to be perkier. And he came in, and he was like, oh, you know, trying to keep things as normal as possible.
Yeah.
That whole denial of she's going to be fine. They're going to do a surgery, it's going to sort her out. So I think I was off for 2 days. And then I was coming into work, and I just, you know what, there's some patients that they touch you, and you just think about how your day's going to go. So I'm just like, oh, this lady. And I just had a bad feeling. Like I just had this is my Nigerian side, like mom was like, I had a bad woman. Like I just had a bad feeling. And so I get to work, and as soon as I get one of the doctors handing over, I'm just like, there's gonna she was like, someone's gonna die this morning. And I was like, and I thought that she had died, so I ran to her bed, and I thought she was still there. But when I got to her bed, she was literally like stoning. Like she was just looking so unwell. I could see the fear of death in her eyes. So I just ran out, and I just like, can we call her husband? I think she's unwell. Called my registrar, looked at her, we got her into a side room. When her husband came, you could see he was just like, he was in so much denial that he was so shocked. But I was thinking she clearly hasn't been like this. It hasn't just happened overnight.
Yeah.
It's been happening.
Yeah.
But he hasn't accepted it. So in that time, we had to call him into a room, tell him that, no, it's happening, and it's and it's pending. So the shift starts at 8. She died by 9:30. And it was a dark day. People were crying, like. And then what got me was she had children, and hadn't been coming in because she didn't want them to see her that way. And they came in and were in tears. Her dad came in and started calling her name. Her parents came in. Like for me, it's just so awful for parents to bury their child, and also for children to lose their parents so young. So it was just so many things. The lights, people were just, it was so sad. Like people were just, it was sad. End of. Like it wasn't like this is our job and we see it, but it was just sad, you know, because it was these 2 young kids. And you just start thinking like of so many things that, you know, could sadly go wrong because they've lost their mum and things like that, or, you know, how will they cope? And she knowing, you know, and just, it was just awful. And I think, you know, I always just do think, you know, because they always say, you know, the dead have gone to sleep, but it's the people that are left after that feel it. And, you know, in the African culture, when somebody passes away, you have so many people around you for the first couple of weeks, the first couple of months. But people have their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And the sad thing about death is that life goes on, but that hole never leaves you. That hole never leaves you. And I know how that feeling is, or I can empathize or even truly imagine what my patients' relatives will feel. And then also imagine the fear of the patients knowing that their family is going to be like that. So it's having those two thoughts, knowing that I can't change that. I just try and make sure that I can be even a little glimmer of hope in that moment of time for the patients, but it definitely puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
For me.
Lessons on grief. Because of you, I know how deep love is. Because of you, I will never not answer the phone when a loved one calls. Because of you, I will express my appreciation, love, and gratitude to those who are before me in that moment and at the present time. Because of you, I know the strength of vulnerability. Because of you, I know the strength of community. Because I know that time is of the essence and tomorrow is not promised, I vow to live fully and wholly every single day that I'm able to. I promise to never take a moment for granted, to not hold on to an argument or anger for too long, to recognize and see the humanity in every person that I interact with, to be grateful for God's manifold blessings and mercies. I know that because of you, kindness is not overrated and neither is love. Okay, so I think now's a good time to talk a little bit about my own experience. Obviously, people who have listened to the podcast, I've mentioned this in passing or in little stories, but in my first year of medical school, second semester, 2016, my partner passed away, and it was a sudden cardiac death. He was a young, fit man with no family history, someone who wouldn't even drink alcohol, nothing, and this very terrible thing happened. I got a text message from him. I was in Cyprus, he was in America, and I got a text message at like 3 a.m. Cyprus time. I don't know what it was. Obviously, I know now, but something told me to wake up at that time. I looked at my phone and I saw a message that said he had chest pain. And I panicked. Immediately, I felt something really bad was happening. And I called him. He didn't answer. And I later found out that was the last thing that he did actually before he passed away. And that was... there was no warning for that. I'd seen him a month earlier. We went to Rome, had a lovely holiday. And, to learn that he died obviously was the shock of my life. Truly the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with. I wouldn't wish that on even Donald Trump.
It's that, I think death is that awful.
Yeah.
Loss is that awful that genuinely you wouldn't even wish it on that person.
Yeah, absolutely not. It was shocking. And I think, how you mentioned that life goes on. I remember I found out at 3 a.m. I got the text message at 3. I called every single hospital because basically I called him. He didn't answer. I called his cousin who he was with and told him to get an ambulance to the house as soon as possible because something was going on. So from my perspective, I thought that there was hope. I later learned that after several cycles of CPR, he didn't survive it and they never took him to the hospital. And I called every single hospital in, the city where he was, trying to find a location of him. And when I couldn't find anything, I'm looking up flights, I've got to get to America, this is, what's going on. I called my dad, and my dad just said, he's dead. I'm sorry, but he didn't make it. And so by that time, it might have been 4:30 a.m. or something like that. And I went to PBL that day, which was at like 9. I think I went at 8:30 or something because I wanted to tell my teacher or tutor that I was going to most likely need some time to go home for the funeral. And I remember, it's like I was walking through a sepia filter, like I walked outside and I just saw people walking, as people do in a regular world. And I was just like, what's wrong with them? Don't they know that the world is done? Like there's a darkness in this world that will never be filled again with light.
You see everybody walking, but you're under a completely different cloud.
A completely different cloud. And I just didn't I genuinely did not understand how the world wasn't like, how could life go on, And I think it's important that, as we as doctors, we recognize that world of people, this is it for them.
Yeah.
For us, it's a patient, it's, someone that we're reviewing, we're handing over to someone else, but it's someone's world. And families, that for me is the hardest part now, because I remember how dark it was for me. Mm-hmm. And it was dark for many months. I didn't know why God chose him to go instead of me. Genuinely the darkest period of my life. And when I see families who are going through what will be the hardest periods in their lives, it's hard. It's hard.
Really hard. It's a dark time.
How do you tell a patient? Patients always sort of go through very similar things when you tell them that they're in their last days of life or that they're going to pass away. There's a shock. There's, questions that they have. There's fighting it. Eventually they accept it. And then always they think about who there is that will outlive them, And they always accept it before the loved ones do. And I don't blame anyone for that. And so when they come in and they call out to their loved one, or their loved one passes away and they're in the room with them, they're given the privilege of being in the room with them, and they come out like, oh my gosh, people run out, doctor, he's gone, because they want you to have that magic wand. They want you to come and look and do something and bring him back. Mm-hmm. And we are humans. I say it all the time, we are literally just playing catch up with God.
Honestly, we're on a timer.
Yeah.
When I said that to my friend, I was like, we're all on a timer every single day. Our body is dying.
Yeah.
We're getting older and older, and every single day our body is dying. And I think when they say, when your parents always say, experience is the best teacher. The reality is that until you experience it, and as much as, even, have you watched elephants grieve? Have you watched animals grieve? It's such a deep emotion that you actually cannot quantify it, qualify it.
No.
That's why when you empathize, and the word empathy means so much more now to me.
So much more.
We throw it about when you're preparing for medical school, you throw it about when you're trying to, prepare for clinical exams, but it's a different level of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
When you've experienced it. And I honestly do not wish on anybody to experience it so they can have that level of empathy, because it's not a nice thing to experience. But
everyone does.
Everyone does. And that's what my mom always says, because my mom, for me, is the strongest person I know. She experienced quite a bit of loss. I mean, she lost her twin sister when she was 16. And my mom always says, she goes, what I always remind myself is that this is happening all the time. It's happening all the time, and God has given us the capacity to deal with it. And I guess, you know, and in anything I try to do, I always want there to be a purpose. And I guess even the purpose in us sitting down and talking about this today is not for anyone to think, oh my goodness, that's happened to Dot or that's happened to Vic. But it's what can we gain from it that can help somebody that's going through a period of grief or of loss. And it's happened to so many people unexpectedly in the last 2 years. And people do die all the time. But I think this was such an unexpected pandemic. You know, one of the doctors, funny enough, that used to work for my dad, died this year of COVID. And, you know, I remember when he came, sat in our house and and he was devastated that, you know, my dad passed away. How could it have happened to Philip? And now we were consoling his wife and family for the same thing, but we could because we had experienced it.
Yeah.
And I've been listening to a series of sermons recently, just about different areas of life. And one thing he was like, one sermon I was listening to was about how do we deal with our seasons of pain. And he said, our pain only has value when we give it purpose. You know, how, and I'll never forget even when my dad was unwell. And I thought that you said something, you said that when people are dying, they know before their family or they accept for their family. I feel, looking back, my dad had accepted, and he took a Christian view of it that, you know, I've run my race and I've run it well and I'm going to meet my maker, and I know that the pain is going to be with you guys, and that's the only part that hurts me. But my dad would say, this will make us better doctors. And I just remember him saying that, like, however we come out of this, we're going to be better doctors.
Yeah.
Because I remember I take pain, things like pain or things like constipation so seriously now, because I know how much discomfort they cause for my dad. Like the level of discomfort. I remember he had like maybe 3 acute admissions while he was unwell, and one of them was because he was so, you know, constipated. He was on Oromorph, he was on all these different things which would completely bung you up. And then so I could just see the discomfort, and it was just too painful to watch. And those kind of things. So when patients say that they are in pain, I take it seriously. Like, not that I didn't before, but I really empathize with that, just being in pain and having discomfort, and the importance of getting the palliative team in on time so that they can manage the levels of discomfort that the patient is going through. So you really do learn from that, and I think that really has helped me in understanding what carers go through. You know, what it's like to be a carer. You know, I remember when we used to learn about carers at university, and I didn't really understand it, and, you know, how there's different things and groups for carers, and, you know, I think I have a lot of African nuances, so I was just kind of like, oh my goodness, here we go, the Brits again, you know. But I've never appreciated charities like Macmillan, and, you know, having a CNS and having St. Francis Hospice like down the road, and having all these different kind of people that you could turn to for help, and little things like that. So
So I think you've really got into sort of my next question, which was, what lessons, you know, have you taken from your personal experience in loss and in grief and applying it? And you mentioned, you know, taking patients' words seriously. Discomfort is real. You know, recognizing pain, recognizing constipation, which are things that are very common and so often dismissed.
They're so dismissed because, and that's why sometimes, you know, you were there. We recently had a little debate with one of our friends about, you know, what do doctors do, and we do a lot, but we take the simple things as not, we don't take them seriously. Like pain is actually the human response to disease and to discomfort. It's how we respond, as that's how animalistic way of responding.
What's safe and what's not safe. You know, so many things for survival.
Literally, a patient comes in with chest pain and you ask them like, how bad is the pain? And but that answer will give you so direct so much of your management. You'll call cardiologists and they're like, are they still in pain?
Yeah.
Because pain means so much. So those are definitely one of the things I've learned. I think there are so many lessons I've learned, and I think I can get quite philosophical about it.
I'll say for me, like the biggest thing that I just really realized in this conversation is my insistence on explaining things to patients. And like to the point where even if I'm telling my sister a story about something that happened, she's like, why did you think I would care about all of the medical part? Like, why would you think that I care about this disease presentation? But for me, it's how I process things and how I understand things. And when Chris died, without any warning or any history, even with an autopsy, we only have hypothesis. We have no real concrete reasoning as to why this caused death or if this was a familial thing. We don't have any of that. Knowing his history, knowing his family history, for him to be the only person to die so in his 20s, without any sort of external substances and things like that, it doesn't make sense. And I spent a lot of time in medical school trying to understand that, And I think because I struggled so much with needing a why, because everyone, and most people, not even medicine, but definitely those in medicine, want to know the why behind things. And without having that answer, I had to accept that the limitations of our humanity, and also, how important it is to explain things to people. Because those are the things actually that when someone passes away and the family is going through what caused this, even when you look at the distrust in things in between various communities and medicine, so much of it can be avoided by clear communication and early on.
And it affects people's grieving process.
Yeah.
If people sometimes do not have any idea of what they weren't told, they start to blame themselves. Or they start to feel,
blame others,
or I didn't ask this question, or if that had happened, and they may be like, they just feel that everybody's looking for answers, like you said, after somebody passes away. And when you don't feel that those answers are necessarily given, or you just feel that everything has happened a little too late, people start asking. It does affect the grieving process, but I feel when you know that there's nothing else that can be done, or you knew everything that was going on, you kind of have an acceptance that life has taken its course, and this is the will of God, or this is this is how it was meant to be. But if you don't have that information, I was talking to a patient the other day, and he had just this is again the problem. He had chronic diseases, and I think he was having kind of like an angina attack or an query end STEMI. And I just explained like the plumbing of the heart, and explained when things deposit in arteries and all these different kind of things, and I was using my hands, and it was an ED and it was a clerking, and he was just amazed. He was just like, nobody has ever explained this to me. It makes a lot of sense. And I guess maybe because I want to be a GP, I say this all the time. I feel when patients understand why they're taking their medication, why they're doing all these different types of things, it makes a lot more sense. We can even, I think we should, down to the point, we should even say how some drugs work. And learn how to talk in a way that we can explain what the drugs are doing, therefore to empower patients to take them. Very few doctors talk about how taking antihypertensives is preventative for strokes. Like, patients don't even know why they're taking it. And it's like, I'm sure if you said to a lot of patients, if you do this happen, and this could possibly happen, not trying to scare them, but saying why we think it's necessary for you to take this every single day of your life, we could get better outcomes, and not just outcomes in terms of even mortality or morbidity, but even in how patients feel. And I think that's important. It is important.
It is so important. It is so important because, we see it every single day now. I've been working in A&E, as you know. I love it. And so much what I love about it is being able to talk to patients, because when you're in medicine, often it's the consultant who's leading it. And what I love about A&E is I get to just sit there, have a chat with the patient, and go through so many presentations are chronic conditions that patients don't understand why something's not working. So why am I here? This guy I saw recently had poorly controlled diabetes. He was now complaining of pins and needles in his legs, worsening in the last couple of weeks, and difficulty seeing. And so I was like, has anyone ever talked to you about complications of diabetes? And I just went through I'm also studying for some exams and things, so I'm feeling quite academic. It might fade, but I was like, has anyone told you about what happens to the extra blood, extra sugar that's in your blood? These are places that it commonly attaches to. And you see XYZ. And this is someone who's had diabetes for 15 years, poorly controlled according to our computer system for several years now. And he said, oh, no one's ever mentioned that. So he's come into, A&E or the ER to talk about essentially a very primary care focused problem. We, quite honestly, from a resources perspective, we would save a lot of time if someone would have explained this to him a long time ago. You don't need to come into the hospital for that.
I'm a proponent of health education and taking time. I think I'm even gonna have a board marker on there and a board in my GP room, because I just feel people are intelligent enough to even go back and check what we're telling them. Mm-hmm. So if we could just give them a heads up, it changes a whole. It even changes their admission. He's now understood why it took 4 hours between him and AMU, and patients will complain less. Patients will have an understanding of why this thing takes time and why they're only seeing cardiology tomorrow, and why, because you're explaining to them as what we're investigating, why it takes this time, why I want to act in it straight away, what we can still do. And that's doctoring. That's the art of medicine. There's the empirical medicine, that's the science. And then there's an art, and medicine is an art, and I think that's one thing I hope we try to get back, because doctor, and I've said this so many times, means teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're teachers first.
Absolutely. Are there any other lessons that sort of you've taken from your experiences with grief and loss that you feel you apply? We've talked about sort of recognizing the signs and symptoms of pain, empathy, and explanation. What else do you think are some lessons that you would take from your experience and apply to your practice?
Okay, so I guess another thing I've learnt from my father's passing is how to make an impact in your workplace and how to use your passage through that place to change lives. And he definitely did that as a GP and as a doctor. He was so passionate about his patients, about their outcomes, about his community. He did a lot for the Afro-Caribbean community in London. He was, I would say, and I take that kind of cap from him, and I take that kind of approach. I call him the unprofessional professional. He broke rules for the greater good. And when I say he broke rules, patients that were often rejected, his drug addicts, homeless people that were undocumented, he fought for them and their health outcomes. And he created that culture in his environment. So I know coming to work every day, not just for my patients, but even for my colleagues, that there's a purpose as to why I work, and there's a purpose in, trying, and it's coming back to that statement that everybody's human. So are your colleagues. So even as the patients are going through things, colleagues are going through things. Colleagues have losses, and colleagues have had parents that were ill during COVID, and we have a colleague, her dad is a renal patient and stuff like that. She couldn't see him because she was working, and she didn't want to be at risk for him, and that was difficult. And colleagues lost family members, so it's just made me realize that there's a purpose, there's a reason why you're here. you know, sometimes we can be so, and it is hard, we can be very disillusioned, you know, we could get paid better, you know. But at the same time, you know, I am always reminded that this life is short. By God's grace, I will live long, amen. And you will live long, amen. But in that time that we have, what impacts are we making? Because I saw my dad make such a huge impact. He honestly is my hero and my role model. He used his life to pour out. He died empty. I always say he died empty. So that's the one thing I've learned, that this is a passage. Everything we go through is a vessel for us to be used to impact the people around us. Otherwise, what is life about really? Is just a selfish, self-absorbed life if we don't think about how we can help and impact others. And I would hope that going into medicine, that would be on the forefront of people's minds. Otherwise, why would we still be here? So once as I have that, you know, there's a colleague that needs to smile today, or there's a cleaner that you want to talk to. I speak to the lady that works at M&S, and she sometimes she tells me things, and I'm just like, okay, fine, why don't you go to this person, or or if you come through ED, or why don't you speak to this consultant, or, you know, you have some clinicians who are afraid to talk to, you know, consultants, and I was just like, oh, you know, talk to this, and they're at ease already, you know. So there's just so many ways that we can impact one another's lives, and I think that's what I've learned from my dad's death. And, you know, I use this time as well to talk about being supported at work, to thank quite a few consultants who were there for me at that time. So I do feel indebted to Bruford Hospital for their support during that time, because they really allowed me to transition comfortably in such a difficult time. And they were really supportive and made sure they didn't put pressure on me, you know, with all the ARCP and, you know, foundation stuff. They really guided me to have a successful completion of my foundation years, made sure that I was okay. I just remember one of the surgical consultants, who often people think are quite standoffish, just really fighting for me, just kind of saying, do you know what, if you know, we're going to work with you, how you feel comfortable working is how we want to work, because loss is real. And I really appreciated him saying that. And I've had a few consultants actually say that, and the reason is, again, is because we're all human. A lot of their empathy came from their own experiences. One of the consultants, she experienced literally the same thing I experienced just 20 years before, and she said she wished she was supported more, and you know, so just, you know, it can happen to anybody, and it really does just give you a level of empathy that just can't be bought.
Oh, I love that. And I think I want to echo in terms of my lessons, I want to echo a lot of what you said. One, life being short, you know, for someone to die suddenly at such a young age was a real eye-opener for me. And for me, like, especially those days, it just was hard to get through the day. It was hard to wake up and continue on. And for me, during that time, I felt I just had to wake up, put one foot in front of the other, and that my steps were ordered, and that until my purpose is done, I'm here. So I've got to do whatever it is that I feel that God wants me to do, because that's it. That's literally the only reason why I'm still here. If I was done with my journey, then I wouldn't be here.
That's right.
There's no in between, and sort of having that outlook really changed a lot of things. Like, I remember the year after, because obviously I was a student still. So, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, Victoria doesn't ever get scared." She didn't know about what happened, because I struggled so much with his death that I didn't tell most of my classmates for about a year or so. And so she made this comment about me being fearless. And it's not that I wasn't fearless. It's just that I recognize that even though this person is my senior, they know a lot of things. I respect their knowledge. I have a lot of deference to their knowledge. But they are just as human as anyone else.
That's right.
They can go just like any of us can go. So why shall I now be afraid of you?
Absolutely.
You know?
The only person I have fear of is the one that can.
Yeah, can't take my life.
Exactly.
You know?
And I think the key thing, and I think it would be a really nice way to wrap it up in terms of talking to anybody going through grief, is one step at a time. Just like what you said, put one foot in front of the other. There is no competition in grief.
Nope.
Nobody can tell you how to grieve.
Yep.
There are you'll read loads, you can read books, you can do that stuff, but just take one step at a time. Be surrounded by people if you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those who you can trust, and those who you feel who are there for you, and you know, they say a friend in need is a friend indeed. You know, you will see your friends at that time, and you will see the people around you, but a step at a time.
Yeah. And
like you said, like, life is so short. No one can actually. They think they can, but they can't even control their own lives.
Literally. So. It's like something that ends up being, it's almost comical. And I just will say, obviously you had a great experience with your work, your work. I didn't have a great experience in med school. They didn't make really any accommodations for me at all. But I did have two very, very good friends who came to see me every day. I will forever, be indebted to them for that. Because, so I just want to ask a last two couple of questions. Usually I try and have something lighthearted and silly. I think not everything deserves sort of that levity. But if there's one thing, I've got two questions. If there's one thing that you could share about your career now with your dad, what would it be?
I think the one thing I would want to know is what my dad would have thought or thought about the pandemic. I would love to have seen my dad work in a pandemic. I can guarantee my dad would have been on like all the African TV channels, just trying to like encourage people to take safety measures. That was his thing. Like, he was a health educator, so he would have been like, because Department of even NHS England used to, one of his roles with them as a cancer lead was to engage with African Caribbean community, and they used to like pay him to do that. So I know that he would have been, my mum says he would have been on the forefront. We'd all have to isolate from him. That is one thing, definitely. I would have loved to have worked alongside my dad in the pandemic. Yeah,
that's great. I think for me, one thing that I don't think there's anything specific that I would want to share, but I think I want to know what Chris thinks of like me now as a doctor. We both were in this med school process together. We've really been trying to, make it, and to see the dream actualized would have been really, something that I wish he could have seen. Very last question. What do you think you'd be teased about the most, or what would you laugh about together?
What, as me as a doctor? Or...
Well, yeah, just in general, yeah. Your professional world.
I think my dad knows I'm really hardworking, but he also knows that I'm a bit of a diva. So I think him seeing me in scrubs all the time, he'll just, and like, he'll just be like, anyway, I'm sure she's going to go and like buy some expensive shoes at the weekend or something to make herself feel better like that. My dad just like, but he knows that I'm the kind of person that will get my hands dirty. It doesn't matter. But I just think he wouldn't tease me because he's always known that I've always wanted to do it. But I just think he'll just know that I'll duly reward myself. Yeah.
That's funny. I think for me, not necessarily in the work setting, but I think, Chris would have absolutely joined the chorus of people that tease me about like my pronunciation on this podcast.
Yes, honey. I mean,
I think
I've teased you about 4 times at least today.
Oh, absolutely. And it's fine, it is what it is, but I think he would be leading the chorus on that. And, those are the things that we miss. But anyway, thank you so much for doing the podcast today.
Much. And I really hope this helps people going through loss to know that you do come out on the other side. You do learn to live with. You don't necessarily forget about it or forget about the person, or you don't have some tough days, but you do, life can still have so much joy and purpose, and just knowing that that person still radiates around and within you is always such a promise of hope, you know?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode on grief, and I want to take the time to thank Dorothy for sharing her story about her experiences with grief and the loss of her beloved father. We've lost so many people, especially in the last 2 years, and I want for us all to remember that each of those people were someone's world. And so, as the world somehow continues to spin, I hope we all exercise kindness with every single person that we come across. If you enjoyed our episode, kindly share, subscribe, and rate us on all podcast platforms. And if you're interested in the Delirium t-shirts before the holiday season, feel free to go to amysayscloset.com, AMISSASCLOSET.com for more information. I want to dedicate this episode to Christopher Ayibonte, my dear Auntie Bridget Kyerematen, and Dr. Philip Abiola, and to the many, many souls departed. We remember you, we honor you, and we thank God for your life. See you on our next shift.